Alright, so this is a bit more of a free format mini episode of the story of Ghost. This is a little bit of an in-between between episodes 11 and the upcoming episode 12, which the script is being written for right now. I just want to use this episode to kind of give my own thoughts about the series so far and what I've observed about Ghost so far, this far into the series. Well, far, because we're only about a year into True Conservative Radio. So one thing I definitely know so far about Ghost is that he definitely rages about politics a lot more than he does later on. You see, I got into Ghosts around the time, a couple months after he stopped broadcasting for the first time back in 2012. And then I started trolling him when he came back in 2016. Yes, I was a troll of Ghosts for a while. However, that does not affect the documentary so much, because my goal is to present the story as objectively as I can without necessarily taking sides. Now, obviously, I will call out misinformation if I see it, and if Ghost says misinformation, I will correct it. But aside from that, I'm not giving my own opinions about what he says or what he does on the air or off the air, for that matter. Now, one thing I will also talk about is the fact that because Ghost's Twitter accounts keep getting deleted, for example, about less than a month ago, his Twitter account got deleted. I think about a month or 2 months ago, I think. Somewhere between then, his last Twitter account got deleted, which really hurts because it means many of his tweets are now unfortunately lost from the Ghost Show era on Vaughn Live are now unfortunately lost. Which means the only way a lot of these Twitter shoutouts survive, for example, is through Ghost mentioning them on the air, as well as a lot of other tweets that Ghost had are also lost. For example, there was a tweet about Nigel Farage, where Nigel Farage actually mentioned Ghost. Granted, it was a paid video, but still, and Ghost, kind of flipped out because he's a pretty big fan of Nigel Farage. Because, he was very pro-Brexit when he came back, and he was overjoyed when the UK voted to leave the European Union. Now, I have my own opinions on that, but again, I'm not going to express them in this video necessarily, because I want to try to remain as objective as I can. But Ghost was very happy about the UK leaving the EU, obviously, even though he's from the US. He's a huge fan of UKIP and of Nigel Farage in general. So hearing Nigel Farage mention Ghosts all those years later, back in 2022 or 2021, I believe it was. I can't remember which year it was, but hearing Nigel Farage mention him really got him worked up and really got him excited, and it gave him a little bit of a boost actually among his viewership. Now, even though Ghost's Twitter account has been suspended, now he's still on Ghost.report, which is currently, I believe, his only social media aside from Vaughn.live, really, because originally he was on Blog Talk Radio, which we're in right now. Then he went to YouTube for a while. Then YouTube started taking down his videos for his content, especially after YouTube began cracking down on extremist content, for example. Then he went to DLive. And then the problem with DLive was that his chat room, it wasn't necessarily Ghost himself per se, it was the trolls in the chat room that got him banned off of DLive. Because first his chat room got banned, and then he stopped broadcasting because he got banned off of DLive. And what happened with that was that a lot of the trolls in his chat room would often spam racial slurs, which obviously in recent years with the crackdown on right-wing extremism is really a big reason why a lot of the YouTube videos for Ghost shows over the years have been taken down, because a lot of trolls will use clips of Ghost saying the N-word, for example, and as a result, it gets banned if it's not censored. And sometimes even if it is censored, I see the ban of El Foxo Loco recently. El Foxo Loco, for those who don't know where, because the documentary hasn't gotten that far just yet, is one of the big Ghost YouTubers out there. After Dark Razors stopped posting about Ghost because he left to join the Navy, El Foxo Loco began posting radio graffiti and Twitter shoutouts on his channel when Ghost came back. Because in between Ghost leaving for the first time and Ghost coming back, Dark Razor Z, or Dark Razors as Ghost often calls him, enlisted in the Navy, and as a result, he didn't have any time to posts about Ghost on his YouTube channel. In the classic era of 2011, 2012, Dark Razor Z was actually the first introduction for most people when it came to Ghost, because he was the one who always posted the Radio Graffiti segments, the Twitter shoutout segments, and occasionally some other segments from the show that he just found really funny. He also posted some True Conservative Radio segments as well. When the documentary gets a bit further down the lineup, I'll probably start using a lot more of Dark Razor's and El Foxo Loco's videos. El Foxo Loco has relocated to, I believe, to Odyssey, I believe. I know he posted a lot on Odyssey because towards the end he had to censor a lot of racial slurs in his Radio Graffiti and Twitter shoutouts posts. So he would post the uncensored version on Odyssey because Odyssey didn't give a shit about that kind of stuff. So I believe he's still on Odyssey right now. I'll probably end up using his videos and Dark Razor Z videos and as such. I'm still using the TCR Archive channel a lot for a lot of the recordings. So a huge shout out to TCR Archive, as well as again to the True Capitalist Radio Wiki on Mirahez or Mirahez, I don't know how you pronounce that. It's the current hosting site for the wiki after Wiki changed to Fandom, and they started cracking down again on extremist content, and giving Ghost himself and the trolls technically count as extremist content. So they had to relocate off Wikia, essentially. Another thing now back to what I've observed about Ghost. A lot of things I've observed about Ghost so far, again, is that a lot of his rage is much more political oriented. Obviously, there aren't that many trolls there just yet. Episode 12, actually, I believe episode 12 is actually one of the first phone calls that resulted in actual cans.wave. Up to this point, most phone calls from trolls are just serious liberal callers or communist callers or socialist callers or whatever. Most serious calls they disagree with are trolls usually just result in some anger and mostly just annoyance from Ghost. Episode 12, however, features the first call that actually leads him to doing cans.wave. To be fair to Ghost, it was largely because of his mood before he took the call, because the month starts with perhaps one of the closest times Ghost came to quitting the show without actually quitting, on May 8th. And that episode was very, very rage-filled, and as you'll see when episode 12 goes on the air, I'm currently still writing the script for it right now. And so yeah, that's another thing I've definitely noticed. I remember listening to these episodes, and I'm just all the memories from when I was like 10 or 11 years old and hearing about politics a lot for the first time, because I was a huge Obama supporter. I was a big Obama supporter back in 2008 when I was like 10 years old. I essentially helped my elementary school and convinced my elementary school to vote for Obama, because we held like a mock election back in 2008 when I was in elementary school. I essentially convinced my elementary school to vote for Obama by like 60% to 40%, which is just amazing to me. But anyway, I remember just hearing all these events that I somewhat remember from when I was that young, and it just brings back a whole flood of memories to me. Hearing all these names like Karl Rove, or Grover Norquist, or Michael Savage, or John Boehner's probably gonna be mentioned at some point later on. Paul Ryan definitely gonna be mentioned at some point later on, since he was Mitt Romney's running mate back in 2012. And just hearing all these names from back then, it really puts into perspective how much American politics has changed from when Ghost began broadcasting compared to how it is to now. Hearing the beginnings of the Tea Party movement from Ghost's perspective, it's so fascinating to think about the impact the Tea Party would have on American politics today. Even if the Tea Party itself isn't really no more, a lot of the politicians who championed it are either out of politics or moved on to other things, such as becoming Trump supporters, for example. And so yeah, it's pretty fascinating actually. It's like True Conservative Radio in the early days of True Capitalist Radio are kind of like a microcosm of how American politics, especially American conservative politics, was in the pre-Trump era. Starting with the return in 2016, obviously Trump was already around, and Ghost became an ardent Trump supporter around this time. And he would remain so up until about I think about a year ago, when Ghost started to say that Trump betrayed us. Because Trump began really pushing the COVID vaccines. He began touting it as a major part of his presidency. And I don't support Trump, obviously. I don't really like Trump, but I will give credit where credit's due. I will say Operation Warp Speed was actually pretty helpful with the COVID vaccine. So I will gladly give credit where credit is due. All right? I'm not going to bash everything Trump did. If I agree with something that he did, I will say it and I will support it. Now, that's not to say I agree with most things he does. I don't agree with most of the things he says, but I will give credit where credit's due, unlike some other people. But anyway, around that time, Ghost began drifting away from Trump, and he began saying, Trump didn't, I didn't portray Trump. Trump betrayed us, And trolls, of course, took that and ran with it, and they began, they began, splicing his voice to make Ghost say that he betrayed Trump and that he was going to, kill Trump or whatever. And it was some pretty funny shit, actually. So yeah, that's another thing. The whole True Conservative Radio was basically a microcosm of American conservative politics before the Trump era. And just hearing all these names just takes me way back to when I was in middle school and high school. Oh my God. Well, anyway, another thing I've noticed. Obviously, there's no intro. It's just Ghost saying, well, good evening, folks. And thank you for tuning in with me to another edition of True Conservative Radio. And of course, I am your host, the man they call Ghost. And once again, I want to thank you for tuning in with me. This is episode whatever of True Conservative Radio, broadcasted on whatever the date is. So there's no intro. It's just Ghost just going off normally. The intro wouldn't come around until the True Capitalist Radio era, actually. And of course, the intro, as I've demonstrated and other trolls have demonstrated, will later become a major source of trolling for Ghosts. Me and other trolls would often remix and splice the intro to make the show seem more ridiculous, or make the show appear in a political sort of ideology that Ghosts oppose, such as True Communist Radio, not True Conservative Radio, True Communist Radio, or True Democrat Radio, or True Bureaucrat Radio was one of the first intro remixes or intro splices, other people may call them. I always call them intro remixes, other people call them intro splices. And yes, for those wondering, I'm not using a script. This is all in my head, actually. I'm not using a script. This is a completely unscripted episode. And really, I think the True Conservative Radio is interesting, not in the same way True Capitalist Radio is, or the Ghost Show is. It's more interesting in terms of the things that Ghost was saying, in terms of political commentary, as well as just the events going on all around Ghost. See, Ghost has the swine flu pandemic, or swine flu epidemic, as I called it in episode 11, because it was still just an epidemic at the time. It wasn't a pandemic yet. The swine flu pandemic going on it's literally just starting when episode 11 comes out, and Ghost talks about it even more in episode 12. When he gets talked about so much, he ends up becoming sick of it, actually. And again, I try to be objective as much as I can, but this is a point where I can't really be objective because it becomes a matter of public health. I can, with the things that Ghost is saying about the swine flu pandemic, I'm not completely surprised he started downplaying the COVID-19 pandemic when that came around in 2020. Now, obviously, Ghost, being an ardent Trump supporter, often would downplay the effects of the coronavirus pandemic, and he was very against the vaccines and whatnot. I wasn't fully surprised given his support of Trump and whatnot, but hearing Ghost downplay the swine flu pandemic was also kind of just added to the fact that it made me less surprised than I already was. Maybe more not surprised than I already was. A lot of the talking points he mentions, it feels like deja vu, or kind of like reverse deja vu, honestly. Because I remember hearing Ghost downplay the COVID pandemic back in 2020 and 2021, and Ghost would bring up Mexico as much as he brings up China when it came to the COVID pandemic. Now, obviously, I'm not a fan of the Chinese government at all. I hate the Chinese government, actually. I follow China Uncensored, for example. But Ghost will often try to deflect the failings of the Trump administration by pointing out China and China's willingness to falsify its COVID numbers and whatnot. I will say, China should not be trusted. The Chinese government should not be trusted when it comes to the numbers of COVID cases or deaths in its country at all. Still not an excuse for, the response that the Trump administration gave. And obviously, I did say earlier that Operation Warp Speed was actually pretty good. That's like the only good thing about the Trump administration's response to COVID. I think other than that, the response of the Trump administration was actually very poor. It was very, very poor, especially in the critical periods of the beginnings of the pandemic. And I think it definitely contributed to the amount of deaths that the U.S. suffered as a result of the pandemic. And it's continuing to suffering as a result. I think the impact the Trump administration had will be felt for years to come as we learn to basically live with this disease as it becomes endemic, essentially. But anyway, enough of that. I think, what was I going to say again? Oh yeah. So hearing Ghost talk about the swine flu just feels like reverse deja vu in a way. He mentions Mexico, how Mexico was basically on the verge of becoming a failed state, which in a way he was right. And Mexico still has a lot of problems with drug trafficking and whatnot, but it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing compared to what it was back in 2008, 2009, 2010. Back in those days, the drug problem in Mexico was much, much worse. There were vast swaths of Mexico that were essentially ungovernable because the federal government just simply didn't have any power, and neither the state or local governments. Local governments are oftentimes corrupted by drug traffickers, for instance. In many instances, the local police, for example, were completely corrupted. So the Mexican government would send in either the army or the Navy. Granted, they had Marines in their Navy because the Marine Corps isn't separate from their Navy, unlike over here, but still. All right, apologies for the interruption there, actually. Sorry for the break in the middle of a thought about Mexico and the problems they were dealing with back then. So anyway, as I was saying, so the Mexican Marines are part of their Navy. They're not a separate branch. In fact, the U.S. is actually one of the only countries where the Marines are a separate branch, essentially. So the Mexican government will often have to send the Army or the Navy in to conduct policing because the local police were so fucking corrupt that they couldn't do their jobs properly, essentially. Now, things have definitely gotten a lot better. Ghost wasn't being entirely incorrect when he said that Mexico was on the verge of being a failed state back in 2009 and 2010. But he'd often use that to deflect away from the swine flu pandemic and try to downplay its effects in the U.S. essentially. So hearing all that it just reminded me of what Ghost would say many years later about the COVID pandemic. So there's that. Now, not finally, but I may go off a little bit more. But for those wondering why I took so much of a break, well, and you'll notice there was a big gap between episode 10 and episode 11 in terms of me posting. Well, the thing is, I got pretty busy for about half the year, and I couldn't focus on a lot of things. The only series I could really continue was Emergency Services Disasters, which is my other big series on this channel, and that's only because that series doesn't have any narration. It's because it's based on Alec Joshua Ebay's air disaster series, which is all text-based and relies on simulations and pictures and videos and whatnot with no narration, which is why it was easier to make those videos as opposed to a video with narration. And also, honestly, I haven't been able to make an iceberg video recently as well. But an iceberg video is coming up. I have a script written for the Tokyo Mew Mew iceberg, which I'll have to revamp because the reboot of the series just premiered, and it's really good. If you like Tokyo Mew Mew, definitely give it a watch. It's really good. It's here for 12 episodes, and I believe they're going to make another season after this at some point to fill out the entire series. There are some changes, obviously. It's closer to the manga in some parts, and other parts are completely original. But all parts were approved by Miya Ikumi before she unfortunately, passed away, which is very tragic, actually. That's another thing I'll have to rewrite in the Tokyo Mew Mew iceberg script, is that Miya Ikumi passed away this year, which really shook all of us to the core, and it really affected everybody in the fandom, actually. So, but back on track with the story of ghosts. Episode 12 script is being written, as I mentioned earlier. And you should expect it out, soon. I'm not gonna give a time frame because something might happen that might delay it, but quote unquote soon. But definitely expect more episodes from me. So I have it planned out. So far, I believe that we'll cover all 2009 by the end of episode 20. Episode 20 will cover the end of 2009. Starting from there, we'll start to get into 2010, the end of the True Conservative Radio era, and then eventually the start of the True Capitalist Radio era at some point. As for how many episodes this series will take, oh boy, this will probably take more episodes than the Christiana Comprehensive History, which is what this series is based off of. I'm actually in the GenoSamuel Discord. I've talked a little bit to Geno before, actually, and I post these episodes to Geno's Discord, and some of the first people that followed the series were from Geno's Discord. And watching that series, I got the idea, someone should create something like this, but for ghosts, because Christery is very, very massive, but ghostery is an entirely different thing. Ghostery is also very massive, but it's not well explored. That's the thing. Christery has been heavily explored by many people. Ghostery, on the other hand, ghostery, it really hasn't been. We have the TCR Wiki, but the thing is, it's not as active as it used to be. So a lot of the episodes aren't as explored as deeply as they would be if, say, Ghost had an active following as big as Chris Chan, for example. So that's where I got the idea to even create this series. And as such, I'm really glad I did. I think this series is actually, a series provides a very comprehensive history on who Ghost is, and really gives an idea of what led up to Ghost getting the following that he did in terms of trolling and whatnot. And so yeah, that's all I have to really say about that, essentially. So yes, definitely expect more content from the story of Ghost very soon. I'm also working on more stuff from emergency services disasters, such as the Kilburney Street fire in Glasgow back in 1972, which was mentioned actually in one of the first videos in the series about the Cheapside Street whiskey bond explosion back in 1960, because the memorial for that was later added on to add the names of the firefighters killed in the Kilburney Street fire 12 years later. So I figured it only makes sense for me to go full circle and cover the Kilburney Street fire at some point. And eventually after that, I'll cover the death of Bradley Golden, which is a very big watershed moment for the volunteer fire service in New York, as it led to, and possibly across the entire U.S., as it led to a massive amount of changes when it came to conducting live fire drills and live fire exercises amongst firefighters. I could go into more about that, but it would basically be the entire video, so I won't go into too much detail. But there's a NIOSH report about his death released, and it's really eye-opening. It's kind of infuriating what they did, essentially, that led to his death. He was a fireman for only about 18 days before he got killed, which is just scary. And the thing is, it led to the shutdown of his fire department, actually. His fire department disbanded because of the legal proceedings against his chief, his assistant chief, and I think one other person who I think was the safety officer for the exercise. And his department ended up getting shut down as a result of that, which is just insane to think about. So anyway, that's what we have planned. And yes, the Tokyo Mimu iceberg will be out at some point. And I also do want to cover other icebergs too. I may do another random video like the whole what Love Live Ship video thing. I want to do a part 2 of that video at some point to cover other ships I didn't get to, like Nijigasaki and Liella ships, as well as some other Aqua Mu ships I didn't cover for whatever reason in the first video. A bit more of a lighthearted video, not just the political topics or depressing topics like emergency services disasters or the story of ghosts, for instance. And I also do want to cover some other series. I may do another documentary at some point. I've noticed a lot of people in the English-speaking side of the internet are starting to cover Drakenlord a lot more, which is really good, because I think Drakenlord definitely lives up to the title of being the German Chris Chan, 100%. Except, his following and troll following is perhaps even more rabid than Chris Chan's troll following was at its absolute peak of either best or worst, depending on how you view it. But anyway, I think that just about does it for this video. Again, this video is entirely unscripted and done while I'm actually at work right now. I work as a janitor right now, actually. So, yeah, I expect more content on this channel very soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, or well, listening, because there's not much video content to give. And have a good rest of your day. And stay tuned for more content from me. Thank you very much.